We turn in the New Testament to the book of Romans, to chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and hear these words. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what the will of God, and what is good and acceptable and perfect. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
It really has been an amazing experience going through this Set Free campaign to see the generosity of our church. And those 70 pledging units so far represent people who are active in our church, as well as some who used to be members of this church who have moved away, but still certainly have a great love for our church and what our church is doing. In fact, just this past week, I received a letter from Dave and Myrna Jo Robinson stating about how much this church means to them, even though they now live in Tulsa, and that they've heard what's going on, and they want to be a part of what God is doing in our church life even today. And so with that letter came a very nice, sizable, generous donation that has been included in the $1,823,000, and certainly has also gone toward the debt retirement that they announced earlier. So people are responding in amazing ways, and it's just really spirit-lifting to hear their witness as they do that. Before the days of cell phones and emails, a young man sent a love note to the girl of his dreams. Here's what he wrote. Oh, my darling, how I long to be in your arms, for you are the answer to my prayers. You are more beautiful than the most awesome of sunsets. Your personality is more striking than that of an angel. And in your eyes, I can see the greatest wonder of the universe. While I'd climb the highest mountain, I'd sail across the greatest sea, I'd forge a raging river just to be by your side. For you are the love of my life. Yours always, Max. P.S. I'll come to see you on Saturday if it's not too hot and windy. What? I'll love you to the end of the earth, and I'll live that love as long as it isn't too hot and windy. I mean, what type of love is that? A love that doesn't inconvenience you, doesn't cost you anything, a love that isn't sacrificial. Isn't there something within all of our hearts and souls that tells us there is something terribly inauthentic about that type of love? In contrast to the guy who really didn't want to put himself out in any way, shape, or form is a story found in the Old Testament book of Chronicles. It's in the 21st chapter of that book. There we find that King David has been instructed to build an altar to the Lord at the very spot which is today the most holy place in Jerusalem. It's known as the Temple Mount. Today the dome of the Rock Mosque stands there. But once upon a time, the great Temple of Solomon was on that spot. And at the time that David was told by God to use that land, the land was owned by a man named Aroha, the Jebusite. It was being used as a place to harvest wheat. An angel of the Lord instructed David to purchase the land, to build the altar there. And when David approached Araunah about the matter, Araunah said in verse 23 of Chronicles, "Take it, let my lord the king do whatever pleases him. Look, I will give you the oxen for the burnt offerings, the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I will give all of this." And normally that's pretty much what kings did. They just took whatever they pleased, but not David. In fact, his memorable reply has influenced the gifts of Jews and Christians ever since. He said, "No, I insist on paying the full price. I will not sacrifice a burnt offering to the Lord that costs me nothing. So who do you think truly understands love and dedication? David? Or the wishy-washy guy who wrote the love letter to his girlfriend? Paul would animately tell you it's David. And I know that that's Paul's position because of the statement that was read for us this morning. Now, scholars tell us that Paul's letter to the church at Rome is one of the hardest books to understand in the entire New Testament because his theological arguments become so complicated at times. But as complicated as some of the theology of that book may be, if you understand the first 2 verses of the 12th chapter of Romans, you understand the heart of the letter, the heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In those 2 verses, Paul appeals to the Christian community. By the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. By the mercies of God. Here Paul is reminding us of all that God has done out of love for us. In particular, the sacrificial component of God's love, as it has been expressed in Jesus, and His willingness to do whatever it took to save you and to save me from sin and from death. God's mercy lived out in the suffering and death of Jesus upon the cross. In other words, Paul is saying, God showed you that true love is sacrificial. So if you truly love God, you will present your body as a living sacrifice. Now, I'm sure that you know when he says present your body, he means present your very life. You will live your life as a sacrifice to God. Then Paul goes one step further to make sure that we understand what he means by living as a sacrifice to God when he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. In other words, living as a sacrifice means no longer conforming to the world's standards of being selfish and self-serving, but commit yourself to being responsive to God's call, to God's will. In the Joyful Christian, C.S. Lewis shares an insight that goes right along with what Paul is wanting all of us to grasp. He writes, the Christian way is different, harder, and easier. Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time or so much of your money or so much of your work. I want you. No half measures are any good. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires which you think innocent, as well as the ones you think wicked, the whole outfit. I will give you a new self instead. I will give you myself. My own will shall become yours. God's will becoming our will, our lives. That, my friends, is what we are striving for when we pray the prayer, Lord, what do you want to do through me? I'm praying that prayer daily. I've actually been praying a prayer very similar to that for years and years now. And I hope that each and every one of you will make that an everyday prayer so that you will be prepared to be an ambassador for Christ in every situation that you encounter in life. Over the 39 years that Leanne and I have been married, I've been the senior pastor of 4 churches. And in every single one of those churches, we have ended up having a capital campaign just like the Set Free campaign that we're experiencing right now in our church. This is the very first debt retirement campaign that we've had. The other three were for building that our congregation believed were God's will for the church at that time. We built a new parsonage at Helena. We built a fellowship hall at Laverne and a family life center in Guyman. And in every one of those campaigns, we asked for sacrificial giving above and beyond our continuing financial support of the ministries and mission of the church. And of course, we all knew it had to be above and beyond what we were already doing, because it's essential to keep the vital programs and missions of the church going. Each time, Leanne and I did what the rest of the congregation was doing, as I have never asked members of my congregation to do anything that I am not willing to strive to do myself. So even though we were already tithing, giving 10% of our total income before taxes, before anything else was deducted, in support of the ministries and missions of our church, just like everyone else, we made what was for us a sacrificial 3-year pledge, and we always paid it off in full. In fact, we usually paid a bit more than we actually pledged. And we have never regretted making that sacrifice to join God in His kingdom work. Our Set Free campaign is the 4th time in our lives that we have been encouraged to make a sacrificial gift above and beyond our tithe. And once again, it is with heartfelt gratitude for the mercies of God that we are making what is for us a sacrificial and significant 3-year pledge. And we're doing it because we wholeheartedly believe that God's will is for this church to be debt-free. That God is wanting to enable us to upgrade our facilities that are a bit threadbare, to refresh things and get us poised for the future. And that God is freeing us for future ministries and missions. We think that's God's will for our church at this point in time. And in truth, this is the largest pledge that we have ever made in a capital campaign. Of course, it pales in comparison to some of the pledges that are being made, but as a good friend of mine who's making a sizable gift reminded me, it's not about equal gifts, Mike. It's about making equal sacrifices. And the sacrifice that you and your family are making is every bit as significant as the sacrifice that my family is making. Not equal gifts, equal sacrifice. The importance of sacrifice reminds me of the first church where I served as senior pastor. Actually, I was the only pastor, but it sounds more official, senior pastor. Well, Leanne and I, moved into that parsonage 2 weeks after we were married. And we were thrilled. I mean, it was an older home. It was probably 75, 80 years old. Small, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. It was clean and cozy. It was our first home together, and it was special to us. Now, being an older home, it had a few quirks. For instance, when it snowed and the wind was out of the north, you could see snowflakes drifting through the bedrooms and the bathroom. And little drifts would form there in the windowsills. Some of the wall plugs only worked intermittently. You never knew if it was going to work or not. The utility room floor had developed a bit of a slope, so it was a slanted room, But it was our very first home together, and we were tickled pink to be able to live there. Then after we'd been at that church for about a year, one Sunday morning we announced to the congregation that we were going to have a baby. Within a couple of weeks, some of the ladies in the church started talking about how that old run-down house was no place to raise a baby. And before we knew it, they convinced the entire congregation that it was God's will to build a new parsonage, which meant we started a campaign to raise money to build that parsonage. Everyone was being asked to give sacrificially. So Leanne and I started making our plans to do just that, making a pledge above and beyond our normal tithe, because we wanted to share in what God was doing in our church. We had saved some money that we were targeting to buy a rocking chair, so we'd have that when the baby came. We decided that we could do without that. We could give that to the church. We decided to cut back on treating ourselves on our once-a-week trip to the town's drugstore for an ice cream soda. We decided we could stand the parsonage being, a couple of degrees colder in the winter and a couple of degrees warmer in the summer, and what money we saved on utilities we could contribute. And I decided that I would abstain from buying any fishing lures. Like I said, it was sacrificial. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but for us it was significant. Then one night, we had a church board meeting to discuss the building project, and the treasurer was talking about how the pledges were coming in, and then he pulled our pledge card out of his pocket, held it up and said, "Now, Mike, we appreciate that you and Leanne are wanting to be a part of this, but we know how much you make, and it isn't much. And you're about to have a baby, and you'll need everything that we pay you when that baby gets here. So we don't want you and Leanne to make a sacrificial pledge to the building campaign. The rest of us can handle it." And I said, "No. I deeply appreciate the care and consideration behind what you're saying, but Leanne and I are going to make a sacrificial gift. Because it's one way we can express our love for God, and we need to do that in every way we possibly can. It's a way that we can share in fulfilling God's will. And we do not want to miss out on this very special thing that God is doing in this church right now. And it's a great opportunity for us to faithfully present ourselves as living sacrifices in response to the sacrificial mercy that God has shown us. And we are committed to doing just that throughout our lives." Now, for you confirmation students, as well as for all of us gathered here, in those first 2 verses of the 12th chapter of Romans, Paul is teaching a lesson in Christianity 101. Revealing the very heart of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. As he tells us, God in Jesus demonstrated His love through the mercy of sacrificing Himself for you. Therefore, authentic discipleship is expressed in living your life as a sacrifice to God, doing all you can to fulfill God's will. That's the truth to build your life on.